Hi there, and welcome to a tour of French history through 5 franc coins. Um, I personally have always enjoyed collecting coins and think that they're an excellent, tangible piece of history. Not only are the coins themselves pieces of art with symbols important to a people and a time, but the denomination and metal content of the coins themselves is illustrating the economics of the time, and you can even find instances in which currency is defaced, signifying how people are feeling about perhaps a leader at a moment in time. They're essentially a bit of history that you can hold. The 5 franc coins of France are a series of coins that have captured my attention as a way to tour through a relatively chaotic period of history. Um, so I don't actually have the earliest coins in this series, which start with the French Revolution and then Emperor Napoleon I, but we can start and pick up with the French Bourbon monarch Louis XVIII. Louis XVIII had quite the interesting life. He managed to go into exile during the French Revolution and avoid the beheading that befell his brother Louis XVI. While he was exiled, Louis XVIII did quite a bit of scheming to return to power in France, but this would not occur until the defeat of Napoleon in 1814. So after Napoleon's initial defeat in 1814, Louis XVIII becomes king, but Napoleon wasn't quite done with France yet. He actually returns from exile, takes control of the French army, and then Napoleon is subsequently defeated at Waterloo. Louis XVIII is then reinstalled as King of France and continues his reign. You may notice that we've skipped over Louis XVII, who ends up dying in prison actually as a child. He was the heir of Louis XVI and is imprisoned during the First French Republic and never leaves prison. So he is sort of only ever nominally king. But in order to keep with tradition, Louis XVIII takes on the 18th rather than the 17th. Louis XVIII ruled as a constitutional monarch. This saw the powers of the king limited compared to, say, the monarchy of Louis XVI. However, this limiting of powers actually helped to make his restoration successful, so the people of France didn't have to worry about abuses of the king. Louis XVIII actually had issues with obesity and gout. He never actually produces his own heir, and so his brother actually follows after him after Louis XVIII dies. The coin itself is 25 grams of zero point 0.9 silver. You have a bust of Louis on the front, along with the words saying Louis XVIII, King of France. On the reverse of the coin, we have laurel branches encircling a crown shield with the coat of arms of France. That's 3 fleur-de-lis. And you can also see on this mint mark that is an A, which means this coin was produced in the Paris Mint. Charles X is a brother of Louis XVIII and takes over as king following the death of Louis XVIII in 1824. His early life history is similar to Louis XVIII in that he manages to go into exile during the French Revolution and then supports Louis XVIII's return to power in France in 1814. Charles X was very conservative and royalist, which didn't mesh well with France at the time. He was much more in favor of the absolute power of the king. This actually causes enough internal strife in France that Charles X ends up abdicating due to the July Revolution in 1830. This was sparked following the king's suspension of the Constitution and the issuance of 4 conservative ordinances. During his abdication, Charles X issued orders for his grandson to be crowned king, but instead his cousin Louis Philippe is crowned king due to some political subterfuge. So Charles X ends up going into exile a second time from France until his death in 1836, and instead Louis Philippe I is crowned in 1830. The coin itself is 25 grams of zero point 0.9 silver. On the front we have a bust of Charles X and the words Charles X, King of France. On the reverse we have laurel branches encircling a crown shield with the coat of arms of France, the 3 fleur-de-lis again. In this case, the mint mark is a B, and that means that this coin was minted in Rouen. Louis Philippe I was a cousin of King Charles X, but took power after the July Revolution of 1830. His history is slightly different than either Louis XVIII or Charles X in that he was serving in the French military during the beginning of the French Revolution, but eventually did have to leave France himself for his own safety during the Reign of Terror. So he was then in exile until Louis XVIII ascended the French throne. Louis Philippe then returned to France as well. Following the abdication of Charles X, he was actually proclaimed King of the French rather than King of France. This was a bit of legal wrangling to make claims from Charles X's grandson seem less legitimate. Louis Philippe ends up ruling France from 1830 to 1848. The Paris uprising of June 1832, as memorialized in Les Miserables, is actually against Louis Philippe's government. Eventually, a much later uprising is what actually ends his kingship. He ends up abdicating and fleeing to exile during the French Revolution of 1848. This revolution was mostly spurred by economic issues occurring within France. The coin is 25 grams of 0.9 silver. On the front, we see a bust of Louis Philippe I, along with the words Louis Philippe I, King of the French. And then we also have on the back 5 francs surrounded by laurel branches. This coin has an A mint mark, meaning that it was made in the Paris Mint. And it also sort of looks as though it may have some damage to it. Perhaps this coin has been defaced by someone who wasn't the biggest fan of Louis Philippe. Another thing to mention about this coin hasn't been cleaned in any way, whereas the previous 2 coins have been cleaned, but not by me. Following the abdication of Louis Philippe, the Second French Republic came to power in 1848. During this time in France, significant conflict between various socio-economic classes eventually leads to Louis Napoleon being elected president of the Republic in 1848. He had some pretty good name recognition as a nephew of Napoleon. In 1851, however, Louis Napoleon actually leads a coup d'etat against himself, first creating an authoritarian republic and then eventually culminating in the declaration of the Second French Empire. So the Second French Republic was rather short-lived, only existing really between 1848 and 1852. The coin is 25 grams of 0.9 silver. On the front we have Hercules and the Maidens as a motif of the Republic, and the motto of liberty, equality, and fraternity. On the reverse, the coin says French Republic, 5 francs, and in this case we have a wreath of laurel and oak. In this particular coin has a mint mark A, so this was also made in the Paris Mint. Following the coup in 1852, Louis Napoleon seized power as Emperor Napoleon III, ushering in the Second French Empire. You may wonder why we've skipped Napoleon II, but in a similar nomenclature issue as was experienced with Louis XVII. Napoleon II actually was a son of Napoleon I, who was nominally emperor briefly following the abdication of Napoleon I. Napoleon II also died well before the formation of the Second French Empire. Much as Louis XVIII, Charles X, and Louis Philippe experienced exile during the First French Republic and the Empire of Napoleon I, Napoleon III experienced exile during the monarchy of Louis XVIII, Charles X, and Louis Philippe. While in exile, Napoleon III attempted multiple coups in order to gain power in France. He tried in 1836 and 1840. After his attempt in 1840, he was caught and imprisoned. It took him 6 years eventually to escape. Napoleon III remained in exile for 2 more years until the ousting of Louis Philippe I, and at which point in time he was elected president of the Second French Republic. Although Napoleon III's empire initially enacted authoritarian measures to control dissent, eventually the regime allowed some more liberal reforms to be enacted. Also, during the rule of Napoleon III, much of Paris was rebuilt in a series of public works programs. Napoleon III's rule ended because of the Franco-Prussian War, and he was exiled following his capitulation at the Battle of Sedan in 1870. Karl Marx has one of the best quotes about Napoleon III and Napoleon I as well, which is, "History repeats itself first as tragedy and then as farce." The coin is 25 grams of .9 silver. The front has a bust of Napoleon III, along with writing declaring Napoleon III Emperor, and the reverse has the coat of arms of the Second French Empire. In addition, this coin is interesting because there's a mint mark. The mint mark is on the front, and it is two B's. That means that this coin was minted in Strasbourg, which is something of an irony, given that Napoleon III actually lost the territory that encompassed Strasbourg during the Franco-Prussian War. So 2 years after this coin was minted, Strasbourg was no longer a part of France. The Third French Republic came to power in 1870 following the collapse of the Second French Empire of Napoleon III. This was a socially tumultuous time, and the war against Prussia continued until 1871. Initially a temporary measure, the Republic officially adopted a constitution in 1875, and over time the hopes of restoring a French monarchy diminished. During the Third French Republic, the French colonial empire expanded greatly. World War I resulted in significant damages to the French economy beginning in 1914, but ultimately resulted in gaining back French territory lost during the Franco-Prussian War. Strasbourg was once again part of France. The Third French Republic ended with the swift defeat of France by Nazi forces in 1940 and the establishment of Vichy and Free France. The French franc rapidly lost value due to inflation during World War I and World War II, and the 5 franc coin we're displaying was before the downward slide of the franc. The coin is 25 grams of .9 silver, displays Hercules and the Maidens on the front, along with the writing Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity, and on the reverse has the denomination of the coin with 5 francs, as well as a wreath made up of laurel and oak, and the words French Republic. This coin also has an A mint mark, meaning that it was made at the Paris Mint. The Fourth French Republic had its roots in the provisional government of France set up following the liberation of France in 1944. Ultimately, a new constitution was adopted and voted on by the people of France in 1946, officially starting the Fourth French Republic. During this time period, much of the activity in France was focused on rebuilding following World War II. In addition, the French colonies began their own struggles for independence, and the newly formed republic had issues with political instability due to the balance of powers within government. Ultimately, the Fourth French Republic collapsed after the Algiers crisis of 1958, where members of the French military called for the formation of a new national government headed by Charles de Gaulle, who became president of the French Fifth Republic. This coin shows the rapid devaluation of the French franc due to inflation. From coins that were once 25 grams of .9 silver, this 5 franc coin is actually 3.75 grams of aluminum. The coin has a bust of Liberty on the front with the words French Republic, and on the reverse has the denomination of the coin, 5 francs, encircled in a laurel wreath that is a bit stylized. The French Fifth Republic started in 1958 and is the current government of France. This constitution greatly increased the powers of the French president and helped to rebalance the balance of powers between governmental branches. During this time period, many colonial territories were allowed to assert their independence under the new constitution. Also during this time period, the French franc was revalued, with 100 old French francs being equivalent to 1 new French franc. The coin you see had silver counterparts before 1970, but I'm cheap, so this one that I'm showing you is only 10 grams of a nickel-clad copper coin, but of the same design. The front of the coin has Marianne, who is a symbol of France, sowing seeds, along with the writing French Republic. On the reverse of the coin, we have the denomination of 5 francs, in addition to oak, wheat, and laurel, and the motto liberty, equality, and fraternity. Of course, the franc has now been replaced with the euro, and so going forward, there are no more 5 franc coins to be collected. It's quite an interesting series of coins, and I think it shows a good bit of history. Thanks for listening, and I hope to make a couple more of these videos on series of coins. Perhaps the next one will be on pennies from the UK. That's about in my price range for coins. If there's anything I messed up or any suggestions you have, feel free to leave comments below, and I hope everybody has a nice day.